The sharp crack of a stage-coach door opening shattered the midday silence of Wilcox, Arizona, in 1878, revealing a young woman whose delicate features were marred by a violent purple bruise blooming around her right eye. Elijah Quinn stood frozen at the edge of the dusty street, hat in hand, the letter confirming his mail-order bride's arrival suddenly feeling impossibly heavy in his pocket as he took in the sight of her. Hannah Zimmerman clutched her single valise with white-knuckled fingers, scanning the faces of those gathered until her gaze landed on the tall cowboy, whose expression had transformed from eager anticipation to something darker. She'd prayed the bruising would fade before her arrival, but the 5-day journey from St. Louis hadn't been long enough to hide the evidence of what she'd left behind. Elijah crossed the distance between them in long strides, his shadow falling over her as he reached for her bag. His voice was low, controlled, but there was an undercurrent of barely contained fury as he asked, "Who did this before you left?" Hannah flinched, turning her face slightly as if to hide the bruise. "It's nothing, Mr. Quinn. A simple accident." The lie tasted bitter on her tongue, but revealing the truth to this stranger husband, or not seemed more dangerous than keeping silent. "That's no accident," Elijah said, his blue eyes narrowing as he gently took her elbow, guiding her away from the curious onlookers gathering around the stage coach. "But we won't discuss it here. My wagon's this way." The midday sun beat down mercilessly as Hannah allowed herself to be led through the main street of Wilcox. The town was larger than she'd expected a proper settlement with a general store, saloon, and even a small church whose white steeple reached toward the cloudless sky. People stopped to stare at the newcomer, their gazes lingering on her bruised face before dropping away when they caught Elijah's stern glare. "You must be tired from your journey," Elijah said as he helped her into the waiting wagon. His hands were calloused but gentle, revealing a carefulness that contrasted with his imposing height and broad shoulders. "It's about an hour's ride to my ranch. You can rest there." Hannah nodded, keeping her gaze fixed on her hands folded in her lap. The letter exchange that had brought her here had been brief practical arrangements between two people seeking companionship rather than romance. Elijah Quinn needed a wife to help manage his growing cattle ranch. Hannah Zimmerman needed escape from a life that had become unbearable. As the wagon lurched forward, leaving the town behind, Hannah stole a glance at the man who was now her husband in name, if not yet in deed. His profile was strong, a straight nose, firm jaw shadowed by a day's growth of beard, and eyes that seemed to hold the vast Arizona sky in them. He handled the horses with confidence, his forearms tanned and strong where he'd rolled up his sleeves against the heat. "I know this isn't what you expected," Hannah finally broke the silence, her fingers unconsciously touching her bruised eye. "If you wish to void our agreement, I understand. I can find work in town until I earn enough for passage elsewhere." Elijah's hands tightened on the reins. "Is that what you want to leave?" "No," Hannah admitted truthfully, "but I wouldn't blame you for not wanting this." She gestured vaguely to her face. The wagon slowed as Elijah turned to look at her fully. "I don't care about a bruise, Mrs. Quinn. What I care about is who put it there and whether they might come looking for you." The sound of her new name, Mrs. Quinn, sent an unexpected shiver through Hannah. "No one will come," she said quietly. "There's nothing left for me back there." Elijah studied her face for a long moment before nodding once and turning his attention back to the road. "Then let's get you home." The landscape opened up around them as they left town behind rolling hills covered in scrub, brush, and cactus, dramatic red rock formations in the distance, and a sky so vast and blue it made Hannah's chest ache. After the cramped quarters she'd known in St. Louis, this endless space felt almost overwhelming. It's beautiful, she whispered, more to herself than to him. Takes some getting used to, Elijah replied. The openness makes some folks nervous nowhere to hide out here, but I've always found it honest. The land doesn't lie to you. Unlike people, Hannah thought but didn't say. My ranch isn't much compared to some, Elijah continued. 200 acres, about 60 head of cattle. Good water source, though, makes all the difference out here. House is sturdy. 2 bedrooms, kitchen, small parlor, built it myself. Hannah nodded, trying to picture herself there. Do you have help? With the ranch, I mean. Eduardo and his son Miguel work for me. Good men. They live in a cabin on the property. Elijah glanced at her. And now I have you. The simple statement hung in the air between them. Hannah wasn't sure what response he expected. She'd come to be his wife, to cook and clean, and eventually to share his bed. The bruise on her face seemed to complicate matters, raising questions neither of them seemed ready to address. I'm a hard worker, she offered instead. I can cook, so keep accounts if needed. I taught school for a time in St. Louis. Elijah's eyebrows raised slightly. A school teacher. You didn't mention that in your letters. I didn't think it mattered. Not many schools out here needing teachers, I assumed. Actually, Wilcox is growing. Talk of building a proper schoolhouse by next spring, he shrugged. But that's for later. For now, I just want you to settle in. Get your bearings. Hannah's hands twisted nervously in her lap. Mr. Quinn, Elijah, he corrected gently. Elijah, she amended. I feel I should be honest about our arrangement. I know what's expected, but I may need time before I can be a proper wife to you. His expression softened slightly. We have an agreement, yes, but I'm not an animal, Hannah. I won't force anything on you that you're not ready for. We can share the house as friends until you feel comfortable with more. Relief washed through her, followed quickly by shame at having assumed the worst. Thank you, she said softly. That's very kind. It's not kindness, it's decency. His jaw tightened. Something the man who marked your face clearly lacked. Hannah turned away, unable to meet his gaze. The road stretched ahead, cutting through the wilderness, and for the first time since leaving St. Louis, she allowed herself to hope that perhaps she had made the right choice after all. The Quinn Ranch came into view as they crested a small rise, a modest single-story house with a wide porch, a barn, and several outbuildings clustered near a stand of cottonwood trees. In the distance, cattle grazed on the sparse vegetation. It wasn't grand, but it had a solidity to it that spoke of care and hard work. It's not much, Elijah said, echoing his earlier statement. It's more than I expected, Hannah replied honestly. After years in a cramped tenement building with paper-thin walls and too many people, the ranch's isolation felt like luxury. As they approached, a Mexican man emerged from the barn, lifting his hand in greeting. That's Eduardo, Elijah explained. Been with me since I started. Knows more about cattle than anyone in the territory. Eduardo approached the wagon as Elijah brought it to a stop, his weathered face breaking into a smile. Senor Quinn, you have returned with your bride, I see. His eyes flickered briefly to Hannah's face, but his expression remained warm. Welcome, Senora Quinn. We are very happy to have you here. Thank you, Hannah replied, grateful for his tact. Is everything all right? Elijah asked Eduardo. She, all is well. Miguel and I moved the cattle to the north pasture as you asked. Water there is good. Eduardo hesitated, then added, Perhaps I should help unload while you show the senora her new home. Elijah nodded, handing the reins to Eduardo before coming around to help Hannah down from the wagon. His hands were firm at her waist, lifting her with an ease that reminded her of their physical differences. At nearly 6 feet, Elijah towered over her petite frame. Come, he said simply, leading her toward the house. The interior was plain but clean, a small parlor with a stone fireplace, simple wooden furniture, and to Hannah's surprise, several bookshelves filled with volumes. The kitchen was spacious by her standards, with a good stove and a large wooden table. Elijah showed her through quickly, ending at the bedroom that would be hers. "I'll take the smaller room," he said, indicating a door across the narrow hallway. "This one gets better light." The room was modest, but carefully prepared: a bed with a handmade quilt, a dresser, a small writing desk beneath the window. Fresh wildflowers stood in a jar on the windowsill, their bright yellow heads nodding in the slight breeze. "The flowers are lovely," Hannah said, touched by the unexpected gesture. Elijah looked almost embarrassed. "Thought the place needed some brightening up for your arrival." He stood awkwardly in the doorway, clearly unsure of what to do next. Hannah realized with a start that he was as nervous as she was, this strange, strong man who had married a woman he'd never met. "I'll let you get settled," he finally said. "You'll find water in the pitcher there. When you're ready, I'll show you the rest of the ranch." Hannah nodded, suddenly overwhelmed by the reality of her situation. "Thank you." When the door closed behind him, she sank onto the edge of the bed, her fingers tracing the careful stitching of the quilt. Outside, she could hear Elijah's deep voice speaking to Eduardo, the sound of her trunk being carried in, the distant lowing of cattle. This was her home now. This stranger was her husband. And for the first time in years, no one knew where she was: not her father, not her brother, and certainly not Charles Blackwell, whose rage had left its mark on her face and whose pursuit she had fled. Hannah walked to the small mirror hanging on the wall, forcing herself to look at her reflection. The bruise was ugly, turning from purple to a sickly yellow-green around the edges. But beneath it, she was still herself, still alive, still free. She splashed water on her face from the pitcher, changed her dusty traveling dress for a simple blue cotton one, and pinned her dark hair more securely. Taking a deep breath, she opened the door to begin her new life. Elijah was waiting in the parlor, his tall frame looking too large for the modest furniture. He stood when she entered, his eyes taking in her changed appearance with approval. "Better?" he asked. "Yes," she replied. "Thank you for your patience," he shrugged. "The ranch isn't going anywhere, neither am I." There was something reassuring in his steadiness, a quality Hannah had never experienced in the men she'd known before. Her father had been mercurial, given to dark moods and sudden rages. Charles had masked his true nature behind charm and wit, until it was too late for her to escape unscathed. Elijah Quinn seemed to possess neither charm nor rage, just a straightforward honesty that was both intimidating and comforting. "I'd like to see the rest of the ranch if the offer still stands," Hannah said. Elijah nodded, gesturing toward the door. "Best to know what you're getting into." Outside, the afternoon sun had begun its descent, casting long shadows across the yard. Elijah led her first to the barn, a solid structure that smelled of hay and horses. "3 horses," he explained. "The bay mare is gentle. She'll be yours if you want to learn to ride." Hannah eyed the large animal warily. "I've never ridden before. No rush. When you're ready." He moved on, showing her the chicken coop, the small vegetable garden that needed attention, the smokehouse, and the workshop where he repaired equipment. As they walked, Hannah began to understand the rhythm of the place, the careful order behind what had at first seemed random. Everything had a purpose, a place, a season. "What do you think?" Elijah asked as they stood looking out over the pastures where his cattle grazed. "It's well planned," Hannah replied honestly. "You've built something significant here." A flicker of pride crossed his face. "Started with nothing 6 years ago, just land and determination." "Why me?" The question slipped out before Hannah could stop it. I mean, why send for a bride from so far away? Surely there must be women closer who would be interested in a man with a successful ranch. Elijah was quiet for a long moment, his eyes fixed on the horizon. Wilcox is growing, but slowly. Not many unmarried women around, those who are. He shrugged. I've been alone a long time, got used to my own company, my own ways. Thought maybe someone new, someone with no expectations of who I was supposed to be, might be better. He turned to face her, his expression serious. What about you? Why agree to marry a stranger in a place you've never been? Hannah looked away, her hand unconsciously rising to touch her bruised eye. I needed to leave, quickly and far. The man who hurt you, Elijah said, his voice flat. Who was he? Does it matter? It might, if he comes looking for you. Hannah shook her head firmly. He won't, he can't. She took a deep breath. His name was Charles Blackwell. We were engaged. Elijah's expression darkened. Your fiancé did that to you, former fiancé, Hannah corrected. I broke our engagement when I discovered certain things about him. He didn't take it well. What things? Hannah hesitated. He wasn't who he pretended to be. He had gambling debts, other women, a temper he hid well until. She gestured to her face. I ended it. He said if he couldn't have me, no one would. That's when I saw your advertisement in the newspaper. Elijah's jaw clenched. So you ran? Yes. She lifted her chin defiantly. I ran, and I'd do it again. To her surprise, Elijah nodded approvingly. Good. Too many folks stay in bad situations because they're afraid of change. Takes courage to leave. It wasn't courage, Hannah admitted. It was fear. After he hit me, I knew it would only get worse. Fear can be useful, Elijah said pragmatically. Keeps you alive. They stood in silence for a moment, the confession hanging between them. Hannah wondered what he thought of her now damaged goods, a woman who had fled rather than fought. We should head back, Elijah finally said. You must be hungry after your journey. I'm not much of a cook, but I can manage bacon and beans without burning them. Hannah smiled despite herself. I'd be happy to cook if you'll show me where everything is kept. You don't have to, I want to, she interrupted. I need to be useful to earn my place here. Elijah looked as if he wanted to argue but then simply nodded. All right. As they walked back to the house, Hannah felt some of the tension drain from her shoulders. She had told him the truth part of it, anyway, and he hadn't judged her for it. It was a small step, but it felt significant. In the kitchen, Hannah found a comfortable rhythm, grateful for the familiar task of preparing a meal. Elijah moved around her carefully, showing her where supplies were kept, lighting lamps as the evening shadows lengthened. There was an awkwardness between them still, but it was the awkwardness of strangers finding their way rather than the dangerous tension she had feared. Over a simple meal of fried salt pork, beans, and biscuits, they began to learn each other's habits. Elijah ate methodically, with the focus of a man who viewed food as fuel rather than pleasure. Hannah found herself watching his hands, large, capable hands that handled the utensils with unexpected grace. Tomorrow I'll ride into town for supplies, Elijah said as he finished his meal. Is there anything you need? Hannah considered. Thread, perhaps, and fabric if it's available. I noticed your shirts could use some mending. He looked down at his worn shirt with mild surprise, as if noticing the frayed cuffs for the first time. Haven't had anyone to tell me I looked shabby in a long while. I didn't mean it's all right, he cut her off with what might have been a hint of a smile. I've been on my own since I was 16. Some things slip by. Hannah's curiosity was piqued. No family. Parents died of fever when I was young. Raised by an uncle who taught me ranching, then struck out on my own as soon as I could. His tone didn't invite further questions on the subject. What about you? Any family that might wonder where you've gone? My mother died when I was born. My father remarried, has a new family now. We're not close. Hannah pushed her plate away, choosing her words carefully. My brother Thomas was the only one I was close to, but he died 2 years ago. Consumption. I'm sorry, Elijah said, and there was genuine sympathy in his voice. Hannah nodded, blinking back unexpected tears. He was a good man, the best of us. She took a steadying breath. After he died, there was nothing keeping me in St. Louis. Charles Mr. Blackwell seemed like a way out at first. A respectable marriage, security, I was wrong about that. And now you're here, Elijah said quietly. Married to another stranger. Yes, but this time I chose with my eyes open. A silence fell between them, neither uncomfortable nor easy. Finally, Elijah stood, carrying his plate to the wash basin. I'll take care of these, you should rest, it's been a long day. Hannah wanted to protest that she should be the one cleaning up, but she was suddenly bone tired, the events of the day catching up with her. Thank you. In her room, Hannah changed into her nightgown, carefully unpacked her few possessions, and tried to make the unfamiliar space feel like her own. She placed her mother's Bible on the bedside table, tucked her brother's pocket watch into the drawer, and hung her dresses in the wardrobe. As she settled into bed, she could hear Elijah moving around the house, checking doors, banking the fire, his footsteps finally pausing outside her door before continuing to his own room across the hall. Hannah stared into the darkness, listening to the unfamiliar night sounds of the ranch, the distant howl of a coyote, the soft nickering of horses in the barn, the creak and settle of the house itself. So different from the constant noise of the city, yet strangely comforting in its wildness. She touched her bruised eye gingerly, wincing at the tenderness. Charles's face floated in her memory, handsome, charming Charles with his winning smile and his snake's heart. She had been so desperate to escape her father's house that she had nearly jumped from one prison to another. And now here she was, in a place so foreign it might as well have been another world, married to a man she barely knew. A man who had looked at her bruised face and asked who had hurt her rather than what she had done to deserve it. It wasn't love, not yet. Maybe not ever. But it was a chance Hannah had risked everything to take. With that thought, she drifted into an exhausted sleep, dreaming of wide open spaces and a tall cowboy with serious eyes who stood between her and the shadows that pursued her. Morning came with a clarity that startled Hannah awake. The quality of light was different here, sharper, more golden than the hazy sunrises she'd known in St. Louis. For a disorienting moment, she couldn't place where she was, and then yesterday's events came rushing back. She dressed quickly in a simple brown dress, pinned her hair up, and steeled herself for the day ahead. The house was quiet as she emerged from her room, but the smell of coffee led her to the kitchen, where she found a pot warming on the stove and a note propped against a cup. Gone to check cattle with Eduardo. Back mid-morning. Help yourself to anything. EQ. The brevity made her smile. Elijah Quinn was not a man to waste words. Hannah poured herself coffee, found bread and preserves in the pantry, and took her simple breakfast out to the porch. The morning air was cool but promised heat later. The vastness of the landscape still took her breath away, miles of open country stretching to distant purple mountains. After breakfast, Hannah set about making herself useful. She toured the house more thoroughly, noting what needed cleaning, mending, or rearranging. The place was tidy but Spartan, lacking the small touches that made a house a home. No curtains on the windows, few decorations save for Elijah's books, practical furniture arranged with function rather than comfort in mind. By mid-morning, Hannah had swept the entire house, washed the breakfast dishes, and was taking inventory of the pantry when she heard horses approaching. Through the window, She saw Elijah and Eduardo riding toward the house, deep in conversation. She smoothed her dress nervously and stepped onto the porch to greet them. Elijah dismounted in one fluid motion, handing the reins to Eduardo. "Everything all right?" he asked, climbing the steps to the porch. "Yes, fine," Hannah replied. "I was just familiarizing myself with the house." He nodded, removing his hat. Up close, she could see the fine lines around his eyes from squinting into the sun, the slight sunburn across his nose and cheeks. "I'm heading into town for those supplies. Should be back by supper time." "I'll have a meal waiting," Hannah promised. He hesitated, seeming to want to say something else but unable to find the words. Finally, he just nodded again and turned to go. "Elijah," Hannah called after him impulsively. "Would it be all right if I made some changes to the house? Nothing major, just some small comforts." He looked back at her, genuine surprise on his face. "It's your house too, Hannah. Do whatever you want with it." With that, he was gone, swinging back into the saddle with practiced ease and riding toward town with Eduardo. Hannah spent the day transforming the bachelor's quarters into something more hospitable. She found clean flour sacks that, when cut and hemmed, would make serviceable curtains. She rearranged the parlor furniture to create a conversational grouping rather than the rigid, uncomfortable arrangement Elijah had maintained. In the kitchen, she took stock of the supplies and planned a more substantial meal than the previous night's simple fare. When Miguel, Eduardo's teenage son, brought fresh eggs from the henhouse, she thanked him with a warm smile that made the boy blush and stammer before fleeing back to his chores. As promised, by the time Elijah returned, Hannah had a proper supper waiting: roast chicken with potatoes and carrots, fresh biscuits, and a simple apple cobbler made from dried apples she'd found in the pantry. Elijah entered the house laden with packages, stopping short at the transformation. His eyes moved from the new curtains to the rearranged furniture to the table set with the good dishes Hannah had found tucked away in a cabinet. "You've been busy," he said, setting his packages down. Hannah couldn't read his expression: approval, annoyance. "Is it all right?" "I can put things back if—" "No," he interrupted. "It's good. Better than before." He gestured to the packages. "Got everything you asked for, and a few other things I thought might be useful." Hannah unwrapped the bundles to find not only the thread and fabric she'd requested, but also a pot of salve for her bruise, several yards of pretty calico for curtains, and a book of poetry. "The salve is from Doc Wilson," Elijah explained. "Said it would help with the bruising." The fabric seemed more cheerful than those flour sacks. "And the book?" He shrugged. "Noticed you looking at my shelves last night. Thought you might like something new to read." Hannah was touched by the thoughtfulness behind each gift. "Thank you. This is very kind." "Not kind," he echoed his words from yesterday. "Just decent." But it was more than decent, and they both knew it. Over supper, Elijah seemed more relaxed, even occasionally meeting her eyes as they spoke. He told her about the town's latest news: a new family settling nearby, plans for expanding the general store, rumors of the railroad possibly coming through within the next few years. "Did anyone ask about me?" Hannah inquired, trying to sound casual. Elijah hesitated, then nodded. "Word travels fast in small towns. People are curious about you." "What did you tell them?" "That my wife had arrived safely and was settling in well." His eyes met hers steadily. "Nothing else. Your past is your business." Relief washed through her. "Thank you." "No need to thank me for basic respect," Elijah said, a hint of frustration in his tone. "I'm beginning to wonder what kind of men you've known that you're surprised by common decency." Hannah flinched slightly at his bluntness. "I didn't mean to offend you." Elijah's expression softened. "You didn't, I just—" He ran a hand through his hair, searching for words. I want you to know that whatever happened before whoever put that bruise on your face, that's not how things work here. Not with me." Hannah nodded, throat tight with unexpected emotion. "I'm learning that." After supper, they settled in the parlor, the awkwardness returning now that there was no practical task to focus on. Hannah took up some mending, working by lamplight while Elijah read the newspaper he'd brought back from town. The domesticity of the scene struck Hannah suddenly, how quickly they had fallen into the patterns of married life, despite being virtual strangers. She stole glances at Elijah over her sewing, studying the strong profile illuminated by the lamplight. There was a solidity to him that she found reassuring, a man rooted to the land he worked, steady as the mountains on the horizon. "You keep looking at me," Elijah said without lowering his newspaper. "Something on your mind?" Hannah blushed, caught in her observation. "I was just thinking how strange this is. A week ago we'd never met. Now we're husband and wife." Elijah folded the newspaper and set it aside. "Having regrets? No," she answered truthfully. "Just adjusting to how quickly life can change," he nodded, understanding in his eyes. "When I first came to Arizona, I thought I'd made a terrible mistake. Everything was too big, too harsh, too different. Thought about leaving every day for months." "What made you stay?" "Stubbornness at first," he admitted with a hint of a smile. "Then one morning I woke up and walked out to watch the sunrise over those mountains, and something just clicked, felt right in a way nothing had before." Hannah considered his words. "And now, can't imagine being anywhere else." His gaze was steady on her face. "What about you, Hannah? Can you imagine a life here?" "With me?" The directness of the question took her breath away. "I think so," she said softly. "I hope so." Something shifted in Elijah's expression, a softening, a warmth that hadn't been there before. "That's a good start." Later, as Hannah prepared for bed, she heard a soft knock on her door. Opening it, she found Elijah standing in the hallway, the pot of salve in his hand. "For your eye," he said, holding it out to her. "Doc said to apply it before sleeping." "Thank you." She took the container, their fingers brushing briefly. Elijah didn't move, his eyes on her face. "Does it still hurt?" "Less than yesterday," she answered honestly. He nodded, seeming satisfied. "Good. Good night, then." "Good night, Elijah." As she closed the door, Hannah pressed her fingers to where his had touched hers, feeling a warmth that had nothing to do with the Arizona climate. The days fell into a rhythm as Hannah adjusted to life on the ranch. Each morning, she rose early to prepare breakfast before Elijah headed out to work with the cattle. She spent her days tending to the house, expanding the vegetable garden, learning the rhythms and routines that kept the ranch functioning. Elijah showed her how to gather eggs without upsetting the hens, taught her to recognize the signs of approaching weather in the distant mountains, introduced her to each of his horses, until she was comfortable enough to let him lead her on short rides around the property. "You're a natural," he told her after their third ride, his rare smile warming his features as he helped her dismount. "Most city folk take months to get comfortable in the saddle." Hannah flushed with pleasure at the compliment. "I had a good teacher." Their hands lingered a moment longer than necessary as he steadied her, and Hannah felt a flutter in her stomach at the contact. She was becoming increasingly aware of Elijah, physically the breadth of his shoulders when he worked without his shirt in the midday heat, the grace with which he moved despite his size, the gentleness of his calloused hands when they touched her. They still maintained separate bedrooms, their marriage unconsummated as Elijah kept his promise to give her time. But in the evenings, they sat together in the parlor, sometimes reading, sometimes talking, slowly building a friendship that felt like the foundation for something more. As her bruise faded, Hannah felt herself opening like a flower to the sun, becoming more confident in her place on the ranch, more comfortable with Elijah. She learned his habits, how he took his coffee black, no sugar, his preference for simple foods over fancy dishes, how he unconsciously hummed old folk songs when absorbed in a task. In turn, Elijah observed her with quiet attention, noticing when she was tired or troubled, finding small ways to ease her burdens without making her feel helpless. He brought wildflowers for the table, carved a better handle for the water pump when he saw her struggling with it, found reasons to touch her brief, respectful touches that nevertheless sent warmth spiraling through her. A month after her arrival, Elijah announced over breakfast that they needed to return to town for supplies. "We'll both go," he said, watching her reaction carefully, "if you're ready to face the good people of Wilcox." Hannah touched her eye, now healed with only the faintest yellow trace remaining. "Yes, I think I am." The trip into town was Hannah's first real test as Mrs. Quinn. She wore her best dress, a modest blue cotton with white trim, and her straw bonnet with the blue ribbon. Elijah, too, had made an effort, wearing a clean shirt and his good boots, his dark hair still damp from washing. "You look nice," he said as he helped her into the wagon, the compliment awkward but sincere. "So do you," she replied, enjoying the flush that crept up his neck. Wilcox was busier than Hannah remembered from her arrival. Wagons lined the main street, people moving between the general store, the bank, and the saloon. Heads turned as Elijah helped Hannah down from the wagon, curious eyes taking in the newcomer who had married the solitary rancher. "Mrs. Quinn." A woman's voice called, and Hannah turned to see a plump, friendly-faced woman approaching. "I'm Mrs. Peterson, the minister's wife. We've all been so eager to meet you properly." "It's a pleasure," Hannah replied, grateful for the warm welcome. "You must join us for Sunday services, Mrs. Peterson continued. "And the ladies' quilting circle meets every Wednesday afternoon. We'd be delighted to have you." Before Hannah could respond, other townspeople approached, introducing themselves, offering welcomes and invitations. Hannah felt Elijah's steady presence beside her, his hand occasionally touching the small of her back as if to reassure her of his support. In the general store, the proprietor, Mr. Thompson, greeted them enthusiastically. "Elijah Quinn with his bride. Never thought I'd see the day." Hannah noticed how Elijah tensed slightly at the teasing but maintained his composure. "Mrs. Quinn needed supplies," he said simply. As they gathered their purchases, Hannah became aware of the curious glances, the whispered conversations. A few of the older women studied her with particular interest, and she heard one murmur to another, "Bruise is almost gone. Poor thing." Elijah heard it too, his jaw tightening. Before Hannah could react, a tall, elegantly dressed woman approached them, her assessing gaze moving between Hannah and Elijah. "So you're the mail-order bride," she said without preamble. "I'm Evelyn Hartford. My husband owns the bank." "Hannah Quinn," Hannah replied, lifting her chin slightly. Mrs. Hartford's eyes lingered on the fading bruise. "Nasty accident you had before arriving. The whole town was talking about it." The pointed emphasis on accident made it clear she didn't believe that explanation for a moment. Hannah felt Elijah stiffen beside her. "Mrs. Hartford," he said, his voice deceptively calm. "My wife and I appreciate your concern, but the matter is private." "Of course," Mrs. Hartford said, her smile not reaching her eyes. "I merely wanted to welcome Mrs. Quinn to Wilcox. We're always eager for new faces, especially those with interesting backgrounds." Hannah felt a chill at the insinuation. How much did this woman know or suspect? "Thank you for your welcome," she said evenly. "I look forward to getting to know everyone better." Mrs. Hartford nodded, clearly disappointed at Hannah's composed response. "Indeed. Well, I mustn't keep you. Good day." As she walked away, Elijah placed a protective hand on Hannah's arm. "I'm sorry about that. Evelyn Hartford considers herself the arbiter of Wilcox society, takes pleasure in making others uncomfortable." Hannah nodded, fighting to maintain her composure. "It's all right. I'm used to people making assumptions." Elijah's eyes darkened. "You shouldn't have to be." They finished their shopping quickly after that, loading the supplies into the wagon. As Elijah secured the last crate, a commotion down the street caught their attention. Raised voices, the sound of breaking glass from the saloon. "Stay here," Elijah instructed, striding toward the disturbance. Hannah waited anxiously, watching as Elijah and several other men disappeared into the saloon. Minutes later they emerged, dragging a struggling, clearly drunk man between them. "Let go of me," the man slurred. "I paid for that whiskey fair and square." "You paid for whiskey, not the right to smash up Jack's place," one of the men holding him said. "Sheriff's going to want a word with you." As they passed the wagon, the drunk man's bleary gaze landed on Hannah. He stopped struggling, staring at her with sudden intensity. "Well now," he drawled. "Who's this pretty thing?" Hannah shrank back, uncomfortable under his scrutiny. Elijah stepped between them, his posture protective. "Move along, Daniels. You're drunk." The man Daniels squinted at Elijah, then back at Hannah. "This your wife, Quinn? The mail-order bride everyone's talking about?" "The one with the—" he gestured crudely to his own eye. Hannah's hand instinctively rose to touch her fading bruise. Elijah's expression hardened dangerously. "That's enough." "Just curious," Daniels continued, oblivious to the warning in Elijah's tone. "Was wondering what kind of woman shows up already beaten." "What you do, sweetheart, to deserve that?" Before anyone could react, Elijah's fist connected with Daniel's jaw, sending the man sprawling in the dust. The other men stepped back, clearly not inclined to defend Daniels. "Elijah." Hannah gasped, shocked by the sudden violence. Elijah stood over the groaning Daniels, his voice low and controlled but carrying clearly in the sudden silence of the street. "You ever speak to my wife like that again, you'll get worse than a bloody nose. Understand?" Daniels nodded weakly, blood trickling from his split lip. Elijah turned to the other men. "Get him to the sheriff. Tell Pierce what happened." As they dragged Daniels away, Elijah returned to the wagon, his face still thunderous. Hannah stared at him, conflicted emotions warring within her. No man had ever defended her so fiercely, yet the sudden violence had frightened her. "I'm sorry you had to see that," Elijah said as he climbed into the wagon. His knuckles were red where they'd connected with Daniel's face. "Shouldn't have lost my temper. Why did you?" Hannah asked quietly as the wagon lurched into motion. Elijah's hands tightened on the reins. "No man talks to a woman like that, especially not my wife." "You barely know me," Hannah said, the words escaping before she could stop them. "We may be married, but I'm still practically a stranger to you." "You're my wife," Elijah repeated firmly. "That means something to me, Hannah, even if we've only known each other a month. It means I'm responsible for your well-being, your reputation, your happiness." The intensity of his declaration left Hannah speechless. They rode in silence for several minutes before she found her voice again. "You don't know everything about me, Elijah, about why I really left St. Louis." He glanced at her, expression softening. "I know enough. You were in danger. You needed escape. The rest doesn't matter unless you want to tell me." But it did matter, Hannah thought. The truth was a weight she carried alone, a secret that kept a barrier between them even as they grew closer in other ways. That night, after a quiet supper, Hannah found Elijah on the porch, staring out at the darkening landscape. She joined him, wrapping a shawl around her shoulders against the evening chill. "I want to tell you," she said without preamble, "about Charles, about why I left." Elijah turned to her, his face shadowed in the fading light. "You don't have to." "I do," Hannah insisted. "If we're to have any kind of real marriage, you deserve the whole truth." He nodded, waiting patiently as she gathered her thoughts. "I told you Charles and I were engaged," Hannah began. "What I didn't tell you was that he was my father's business partner. Much older than me, nearly 40 to my 23. My father arranged the match, saw it as a way to strengthen his business connections." Elijah's expression darkened, but he remained silent. "At first, Charles was charming, attentive. I wasn't in love with him, but I thought perhaps affection would grow. After my brother died, I was alone in my father's house, and marriage seemed like the only respectable escape." Hannah took a deep breath, forcing herself to continue. 3 weeks before the wedding, I discovered Charles had been embezzling from my father's business. When I confronted him, he changed, became someone I didn't recognize. He admitted everything, said it didn't matter, that once we were married, my father would never press charges against his son-in-law. Her hands twisted nervously in her lap. I told him I couldn't marry him knowing what he'd done. He became enraged. Said I had no choice, that the wedding invitations were sent, arrangements made. When I insisted, he struck me. Said if I told anyone, he'd ruin my reputation, claim I'd been improper with him. Elijah's jaw clenched, but he let her continue without interruption. I went home with my face bruised, told my father I'd fallen. I don't think he believed me, but he didn't ask questions. That night, I packed what I could carry and slipped out. I'd seen your advertisement in the newspaper weeks earlier, had even written to you without sending the letter. I finished it that night and posted it on my way to a hotel, where I stayed until I received your response." Hannah looked up at Elijah, tears blurring her vision. "I didn't tell you the whole truth in my letters. I was afraid you wouldn't want a woman with such a scandal attached to her name." "Hannah," Elijah said softly, reaching for her hand, "you did what you had to do to survive." "But I lied to you," she insisted, "by omission at least." "And I didn't ask the questions I should have," he countered. "We both entered this marriage with our own reasons, our own secrets." Hannah studied his face in the gathering darkness. "Do you have secrets, Elijah?" He was quiet for a long moment. "Not secrets exactly, just parts of myself I've kept private for a long time." "Will you tell me?" she asked gently. Elijah sighed, leaning against the porch railing. "I told you my parents died when I was young. What I didn't say was how. My father was a drunk, mean one. One night he went after my mother with his belt. I tried to stop him, but I was just a boy. He knocked me aside, kept beating her." Hannah's heart ached at the pain in his voice. "She died that night. Father hanged himself in the barn when he realized what he'd done. My uncle, my mother's brother, took me in after that. Good man. Taught me everything I know about ranching. Also taught me that a man who raises his hand to a woman isn't a man at all." "That's why you reacted so strongly to Daniels today," Hannah said, understanding dawning. Elijah nodded. "When I saw your face that first day with that bruise, it brought it all back, made me want to find the man who done it," and he cut himself off, shaking his head. "Doesn't matter now. You're here, you're safe." "Yes," Hannah whispered. "I am safe. With you." Their eyes met in the darkness, and something passed between them, understanding, connection, the beginning of trust deeper than either had expected to find. Elijah's hand found hers, their fingers intertwining on the porch railing. "It's getting late," he said softly. "We should go in." Hannah nodded, but neither moved, reluctant to break the moment of intimacy. Finally, Elijah gently tugged her hand, leading her back into the warmth of the house. At her bedroom door, he paused, still holding her hand. "Thank you for telling me," he said, "for trusting me with your truth." "Thank you for listening," Hannah replied, "for not judging." Elijah hesitated, then slowly, giving her time to pull away if she wished, He leaned down and pressed his lips to her forehead, a gentle, chaste kiss that nevertheless sent warmth flooding through her. "Good night, Hannah." "Good night, Elijah," she whispered, her voice unsteady. As she closed her door, Hannah pressed her fingers to the spot where his lips had touched her skin, a smile curving her mouth in the darkness. For the first time since arriving at the ranch, she felt not just safe, but hopeful that what had begun as an arrangement of convenience might grow into something far more meaningful. The following weeks brought subtle changes to their relationship. Elijah found reasons to touch her more frequently, a hand at the small of her back as they walked, fingers brushing as they passed items at the table, standing closer than strictly necessary when they worked together. Hannah found herself responding in kind, no longer flinching from physical contact, but welcoming it, even initiating small touches of her own. Their conversations deepened, moving beyond the practicalities of ranch life to personal hopes and dreams. Hannah learned that Elijah had once dreamed of being a teacher before circumstances led him to ranching. He discovered her love of music, her secret wish to learn to play the piano that sat untuned in the Wilcox church. Why secret? He asked one evening as they sat on the porch, watching the sunset paint the mountains gold and purple. Hannah smiled ruefully. "My father considered music frivolous, said it gave women ideas above their station." "Your father sounds like a difficult man," Elijah observed. "He wasn't always," Hannah said, thinking back to rare, happy memories. "After my mother died, he changed, became harder, more controlling. I think he was afraid of losing what little family he had left." "Fear makes people do strange things," Elijah agreed. "Still, no excuse for making a child afraid to dream." Hannah glanced at him, touched by his indignation on her behalf. "What about your dreams? Is this ranch everything you hoped for?" Elijah was quiet for a moment, considering. "It's close. Land of my own, work that matters, a life built on my own terms." His eyes met hers. "But I always imagined a family here someday, children running across that field laughing, a home filled with more than just my own silence." The admission hung in the air between them, laden with meaning. Hannah felt her cheeks warm. "Children would be nice," she said softly. "Someday." Elijah's gaze intensified. "Someday," he agreed. That night, as Hannah prepared for bed, there was a gentle knock at her door. Opening it, she found Elijah standing there, something held behind his back. "Is everything all right?" she asked, suddenly conscious of her loose hair and nightdress. "Everything's fine," he assured her. I have something for you." From behind his back, he produced a small wooden box. Hannah took it curiously, opening the lid to find a delicate silver hair comb nestled on a bed of cotton. "It was my mother's," Elijah explained, a hint of nervousness in his voice. "One of the few things I kept. I thought you might like it." Hannah touched the comb reverently, deeply moved by the gift. "Elijah, I can't take something so precious. You're not taking it," he interrupted gently. "I'm giving it to my wife." The word wife sent a shiver through her. It had been nearly 2 months since her arrival, and though legally they were married, they had yet to truly become husband and wife in all ways. "It's beautiful," she whispered. "Thank you." Elijah nodded, his eyes dropping to her loose hair. "It would look nice. There." He gestured vaguely, then seemed to catch himself. "Well, good night." As he turned to go, Hannah found herself reaching for his hand. "Elijah." He stopped, looking back at her questioningly. Hannah's heart pounded in her chest as she gathered her courage. "You don't have to go." His eyes widened slightly, understanding dawning in them. "Hannah, are you sure? I promised you time." "I've had time," she said softly. "I don't need more." For a long moment, Elijah stood frozen, searching her face for any sign of doubt or fear. Finding none, he stepped across the threshold, closing the door behind him. That night, their marriage was truly consummated not in haste or duty, but in tenderness and growing affection. Elijah's hands, so capable with horses and cattle, proved equally gentle with his wife, and Hannah discovered a passion in herself she had never known existed. Afterward, lying in his arms as moonlight spilled through the curtain she had made, Hannah felt a sense of rightness, of completion. Elijah's fingers traced lazy patterns on her bare shoulder, his breathing slow and content. "I never expected this," he murmured against her hair. "Expected what?" Hannah asked, nestling closer. "To feel this way." He propped himself up on one elbow, looking down at her with an expression that made her breath catch. "When I sent for a bride, I thought I was getting a partner, someone practical to help with the ranch, to cook and clean. I never expected." "What?" Hannah prompted when he trailed off. "You," he said simply. "Someone who would make me feel things I'd forgotten I could feel." Hannah reached up to touch his face, her heart full. "I never expected you either. A man who could make me feel safe again, who could make me trust again." Elijah turned his head to press a kiss into her palm. "Stay with me tonight, in my room. It's bigger and the bed's not as creaky." Hannah smiled, nodding. "I'll stay with you tonight and all the nights after." As spring turned to summer, Hannah and Elijah settled into a deeper rhythm of married life. They shared a bedroom now, their nights filled with whispered conversations and growing passion. During the days, they worked side by side, building a partnership that extended beyond the bedroom. Hannah became a familiar figure in Wilcox, joining the ladies' quilting circle, attending church services, gradually winning over even skeptical townspeople with her quiet dignity and obvious devotion to her husband. Even Mrs. Hartford had to grudgingly admit that the Quinns seemed well suited, despite the unconventional start to their marriage. The bruise that had marked Hannah's arrival was long forgotten, though occasionally she would catch Elijah looking at her with an expression that told her he had not forgotten the man who had put it there. In those moments, she would touch his face, drawing him back to the present, to her. "I'm here now," she would remind him. "With you." As July drew to a close, bringing with it the most intense heat of the Arizona summer, Hannah began to suspect a new change was coming to their lives. Her monthly courses were late, her breasts tender, certain foods suddenly unappetizing. She kept her suspicions to herself, wanting to be certain before sharing the news with Elijah. On a particularly hot afternoon, as Hannah was preserving peaches from the small orchard Elijah had planted years before, a commotion in the yard drew her attention. Looking through the window, she saw a cloud of dust approaching the ranch, a rider, pushing his horse hard. Wiping her hands on her apron, Hannah stepped onto the porch as Eduardo intercepted the approaching stranger. "I'm looking for Hannah Zimmerman," the rider called, his voice carrying across the yard. "I was told in town she lives here now." Hannah froze, her blood running cold. No one in Wilcox knew her maiden name. She had arrived as Hannah Quinn, and that was how everyone knew her. "There's no Zimmerman here," Eduardo replied cautiously. "This is the Quinn Ranch." The rider dismounted, pushing past Eduardo toward the house. "The woman I'm looking for is about 23, dark hair, pretty, married a rancher named Quinn." Hannah's hands gripped the porch railing as the rider looked up and saw her standing there. Recognition flashed across his face, a face she knew all too well. "Hannah," he called, starting toward the porch. "Thank God I found you." "Thomas," Hannah whispered, disbelieving. It can't be. The man who looked so impossibly like her dead brother climbed the porch steps, stopping just short of embracing her. "It's me, Hannah. I'm alive." Hannah staggered back, her mind reeling. "No, my brother is dead. I buried him 2 years ago." "Not your brother," the man corrected gently. "Thomas was my friend. I'm Henry Zimmerman, your cousin." The world seemed to tilt beneath Hannah's feet. "Cousin, I have no cousins. My father was an only child." The man who called himself Henry shook his head. "Your father lied to you. He had a younger brother, my father, who left home after a falling out. They never reconciled." Hannah's legs gave way, and she sank onto the porch bench, struggling to make sense of these revelations. "Why are you here? How did you find me?" Henry sat beside her, keeping a respectful distance. "Thomas and I served together in the army. When he fell ill, he made me promise to look after you if anything happened to him. After he died, I tried to find you in St. Louis, but you'd vanished. It's taken me months to track you here." "Why?" Hannah demanded, anger rising through her confusion. "Why look for me at all?" "Because Thomas was worried about you," Henry said, his expression earnest. "He knew your father was pushing you toward Blackwell, and he didn't trust the man. He made me swear to make sure you were safe." At the mention of Charles Blackwell, Hannah tensed. "You know about Charles?" "I know he's been looking for you," Henry said grimly. "That's the other reason I came, to warn you." Before Hannah could respond, the sound of approaching hoofbeats announced Elijah's return from checking the far pastures. He rode into the yard, taking in the scene on the porch with a single glance, the stranger sitting too close to his wife, Hannah's pale, shocked expression. In an instant, Elijah was off his horse and striding toward them, his face hard with suspicion. "Hannah, what's going on?" She stood shakily, moving to meet him. "Elijah, this is. He says he's my cousin, Henry Zimmerman." Elijah's eyes narrowed as he looked past her to the man on the porch. "Zimmerman, your maiden name?" Hannah nodded. "He claims my father had a brother I never knew about. That my brother Thomas asked him to find me before he died." "And did he explain why it took him 2 years to fulfill this promise?" Elijah asked, his voice dangerous. Henry stood, addressing Elijah directly. "Mr. Quinn, I understand your suspicion, but I'm here out of concern for Hannah's safety. Charles Blackwell has been searching for her since she disappeared. The man is obsessed, dangerous." At the mention of Blackwell, Elijah's expression darkened further. "Come inside," he said abruptly. "This isn't a conversation for the yard." In the parlor, with Eduardo stationed vigilantly outside, Henry told his story in full. How he had grown up hearing about the family rift, how he had met Thomas Zimmerman by chance in the army and discovered their connection, how Thomas had shared his concerns about Hannah's engagement to Blackwell. "When Thomas died, I tried to find you," he explained to Hannah. "But by then, you'd already fled. I returned to St. Louis months later and learned from gossip that you'd broken your engagement and vanished. Blackwell was telling anyone who would listen that you'd stolen money from him, that he needed to find you to recover it." "That's a lie," Hannah said fiercely. "I never took anything from him." "I know," Henry assured her, "but it gave him a pretext to search for you. I've been following his trail for months, always a few steps behind. When I heard rumors of a mail-order bride matching your description arriving in Wilcox with a bruised face, I feared the worst." Elijah, who had been standing by the fireplace like a sentinel, finally spoke. "How do we know you're who you claim to be? That this isn't some trick of Blackwell's to find Hannah?" Henry reached into his jacket and withdrew a worn photograph. "This was Thomas's. He carried it always." Hannah took the photograph with trembling hands. It showed herself as a teenager, standing beside her brother in front of their St. Louis home. She remembered the day. It was taken her 16th birthday, one of the last happy days before Thomas left for the army. "He gave this to you," she whispered. Henry nodded. "He wanted me to be able to recognize you, said you were the only thing in his life he was proud of." Tears filled Hannah's eyes as she passed the photograph to Elijah. He studied it carefully, his expression softening slightly as he looked from the image of young Hannah to the woman before him. "If what you're saying is true," Elijah said to Henry. "Then Blackwell is still searching for my wife. Is he close to finding her?" "I don't know," Henry admitted. "I lost track of him about a month ago in Santa Fe, but he's determined and he has money to spend on the search." Hannah felt cold despite the summer heat. "What does he want from me?" "Revenge for breaking the engagement, that," Henry said grimly. "And I think he truly believes he owns you. Men like Blackwell don't take rejection well." Elijah's jaw tightened. "He'll find more than he bargained for if he comes to my ranch." The threat in his voice was unmistakable, and Hannah found herself torn between fear of what might come and gratitude for Elijah's unwavering protection. "I should go," Henry said, rising. "I only came to warn you to make sure you were safe. I can see that you are." "Where will you go?" Hannah asked, surprised by her reluctance to see this newfound family member leave. Henry shrugged. "I've been drifting since the army. Thought I might head to California, see what opportunities lie there." Elijah and Hannah exchanged a look, a silent communication passing between them. Elijah nodded slightly, responding to the question in his wife's eyes. "Stay," Hannah said to Henry. "At least for a few days. We have room and—" "I'd like to hear more about your father, about the family I never knew I had." Henry hesitated, looking to Elijah for confirmation. "I wouldn't want to impose." "Your family," Elijah said simply. "Hannah's family. That makes you welcome here." That evening, over supper, Henry shared stories of his father Hannah's uncle, who had died the previous year. He described a man who had regretted the rift with his brother, but had been too proud to make amends, who had kept track of his niece and nephew from afar through mutual acquaintances. "He would have been proud to know you escaped Blackwell," Henry told Hannah. "He always said the Zimmermans were survivors." As they talked, Hannah observed the growing ease between Henry and Elijah. Despite his initial suspicion, Elijah seemed to have accepted Henry's story, perhaps recognizing the family resemblance. Hannah herself could now see the same set of the jaw, the same crease between the eyebrows when concentrating. Later, as she and Elijah prepared for bed, Hannah finally voiced the fear that had been growing since Henry's arrival. "What if Charles does find me? What if he comes here?" Elijah sat beside her on the bed, taking her hands in his. "Then he'll find not a frightened young woman alone, but a wife protected by her husband, her family, her community." "I'm afraid," Hannah admitted. "Not just for myself, but for you. You don't know Charles, how charming he can be, how calculating, how dangerous when crossed." "I know men like him," Elijah said darkly. "Men who think their money or position gives them the right to take whatever they want, to hurt whoever stands in their way." His fingers brushed her cheek, where the bruise had long since faded. "He will never touch you again, Hannah. I swear it." The fierceness of his promise both comforted and worried her. "I couldn't bear it if something happened to you because of me." "Nothing will happen to me," Elijah assured her, pulling her close. "But something might happen to him if he's foolish enough to come here." Hannah rested her head against his chest, listening to the steady beat of his heart. There was something she needed to tell him, something that made the stakes of any confrontation with Charles even higher. But the words stuck in her throat, fear making her hesitate. "Elijah," she finally began, "there's something you should know." A sharp knock on the bedroom door interrupted her. "Elijah, Hannah," Henry's urgent voice called from the hallway. "Someone's coming. Riders from the north." Elijah was on his feet instantly, reaching for his gun belt. "Stay here," he instructed Hannah as he strode to the door. But Hannah wouldn't be left behind, not with danger approaching her home, her husband. She grabbed her robe, following Elijah into the hallway where Henry waited, his own pistol in hand. "How many?" Elijah demanded. "3, maybe 4, Henry replied. "Still a ways off, but heading straight for the ranch." Elijah nodded grimly. "Eduardo and Miguel." Eduardo's getting his rifle. Miguel's in the barn, ready to ride for help if needed. The three of them moved to the parlor, where Eduardo joined them, his ancient Winchester in his weathered hands. Elijah positioned Hannah behind him, away from the windows as they waited in tense silence. The sound of approaching horses grew louder, and then voices, a man calling out, demanding to know if anyone was home. Hannah's blood froze as she recognized the voice. "It's him," she whispered. "Charles." Elijah's expression hardened. "Stay inside," he said to Hannah, "no matter what you hear. Promise me." Before she could respond, he was moving to the door, Henry and Eduardo flanking him. Hannah pressed herself against the wall, heart pounding, as the door opened and Elijah stepped onto the porch. "This is private property," she heard him say, his voice carrying clearly in the night air. "State your business." "I'm looking for Hannah Zimmerman," Charles Blackwell's smooth voice replied. "I have reason to believe she's here." "There's no one by that name on my ranch," Elijah said flatly. "Now turn around and head back to town before I consider you trespassers." "Don't play games with me, Cowboy," Charles said, his voice hardening. "I know my fiancée is here, the woman who stole from me, who owes me." "Your fiancée?" Elijah's voice held dangerous amusement. "The only woman here is my wife, Hannah Quinn, and she owes you nothing." A tense silence followed, broken by the sound of boots on the porch steps. "I want to see her," Charles demanded. "If she's truly your wife, if she truly wants to stay, I'll leave, but I want to hear it from her lips." Unable to stand it any longer, Hannah moved toward the door despite Elijah's command to stay inside. As she stepped onto the porch, she saw Charles for the first time in months, still handsome in his fine clothes, but with a hardness around his eyes that had only been hinted at before. "Hannah," he said, his voice softening as he saw her. "Thank God I found you." "Hello, Charles," she replied steadily, feeling Elijah's solid presence beside her, his arm coming around her waist protectively. Charles's eyes narrowed at the gesture, taking in the scene, Hannah in her nightclothes, clearly sharing Elijah's bedroom, the protective stance of the men around her. "So it's true. You've married this rancher?" "Yes," Hannah confirmed. "Elijah is my husband now. Legally, properly, and by my full consent." "You belong with me," Charles insisted, his charm giving way to something uglier. "We had an understanding, a future planned." "An understanding you broke when you struck me," Hannah said clearly, "when you admitted to stealing from my father. When you threatened to ruin me if I didn't marry you despite knowing what kind of man you truly are." Charles's face twisted with rage. "You ungrateful little—" "That's enough," Elijah interrupted, stepping forward. "You've seen her. You've heard her. Now leave my property and never return." For a moment, it seemed Charles might argue further, might even attempt violence. His hand twitched toward his jacket, and Hannah tensed, fearing he was reaching for a weapon. But then his gaze moved past Elijah to where Henry and Eduardo stood, weapons ready, and his posture shifted subtly. "This isn't over," he said, his voice cold with promise. "You've made a powerful enemy, Quinn." "And you've wasted a long journey," Elijah replied evenly. "Hannah is my wife. She stays with me. Whatever claim you thought you had on her is finished." Charles's eyes met Hannah's one last time, and she shivered at the hatred she saw there. "We'll see about that," he said softly before turning to his companions. "Mount up. We're leaving." As the riders disappeared into the darkness, Hannah sagged against Elijah, the tension of the confrontation leaving her shaking. He held her close, his arms strong and steady around her. "He'll be back," Henry said grimly, watching the retreating figures. "Men like that don't give up easily." "Then we'll be ready," Elijah replied. "But not tonight. Tonight we rest. Tomorrow we prepare." That night, as they lay together in the darkness, Hannah finally found the courage to share her news. "Elijah," she whispered, placing his hand on her still flat stomach. "There's something I need to tell you." He went very still beside her, understanding dawning slowly. "Hannah, are you?" "I think so," she said softly. "I'm not certain yet, but yes, I believe I'm carrying your child." In the dim moonlight filtering through the window, she could see his expression transform wonder, joy, and a fierce protectiveness washing over his features. "A baby," he breathed. "Our baby." Hannah nodded, tears of happiness mingling with lingering fear. "I was going to tell you tonight before Henry interrupted. With Charles appearing, I'm afraid, Elijah. Not just for us now, but for our child." Elijah gathered her closer, his hand still resting protectively over her stomach. "Listen to me, Hannah. I won't let anything happen to you or our baby. Charles Blackwell is just a man, a coward who hits women and makes threats from the safety of numbers. He doesn't know what real strength is." "What will we do?" Hannah asked. "Tomorrow, I'll ride into town, speak with Sheriff Pierce. Henry will stay here with Eduardo to watch over you." Elijah's voice was calm, methodical. "We'll be vigilant, but we won't live in fear. This is our home, our life. No one will take that from us." Hannah nestled closer to her husband, drawing comfort from his unwavering confidence. As she drifted toward sleep, one hand protectively covering her stomach, she realized that for the first time in her life, she was part of something worth fighting for, a family of her own making, a love freely chosen, a future filled with promise. The next morning dawned clear and hot, the summer sun already intense by breakfast. Elijah prepared to ride into Wilcox, checking his pistol carefully before strapping it on. "Stay close to the house," he instructed Hannah as he prepared to leave. "Eduardo and Henry will be nearby. Miguel is riding to the Wilson Ranch to alert our neighbors of possible trouble." Hannah nodded, trying to project a calm she didn't feel. "Be careful in town. Charles can be persuasive. He may have already spoken to people, told them his version of events." "Let him try," Elijah said grimly. "The people of Wilcox know me. They know you. They'll see through whatever lies he spins." After a lingering kiss, Elijah mounted his horse and rode out, leaving Hannah with her cousin and Eduardo for protection. The day passed slowly, tension hanging in the air like the gathering heat. Hannah tried to occupy herself with normal tasks, baking bread, mending clothes, planning the evening meal, but her mind kept returning to Charles, to the hatred in his eyes, to what he might do next. Henry kept her company, sharing more stories of the family she'd never known, helping with chores, his easy manner gradually relieving some of her anxiety. By mid-afternoon, as they sat shelling peas on the porch, Hannah found herself almost relaxed. "You love him very much," Henry observed, nodding toward the road where Elijah would eventually appear. "It's clear in the way you look for him." Hannah smiled softly. "I do. It surprised me how quickly it happened. When I answered his advertisement, I was only looking for escape, for safety. I never expected to find this." "Thomas would be pleased," Henry said. "He worried about you, you know, worried you'd never find happiness with the life your father had planned for you." "I wish he could have known Elijah," Hannah said wistfully. "They would have liked each other, I think." Henry nodded, then hesitated before asking, "And the baby? When will you tell the others?" Hannah's hand flew to her stomach, surprised. "How did you know?" Henry smiled gently. "I grew up with 4 sisters. I recognize the signs. Don't worry, your secret is safe until you're ready to share it." Before Hannah could respond, Eduardo appeared around the corner of the house, rifle in hand. "Riders coming," he announced tensely. "Not Senor Quinn." Henry was on his feet instantly, moving to Hannah's side. "How many?" "Just 2, Eduardo replied. "But one looks like the man from last night." Hannah's heart sank. Charles had returned just as they'd feared. But why come in daylight with only one companion? "Get inside," Henry urged her. "Lock the door, we'll handle this." But Hannah stood her ground, lifting her chin defiantly. "No, this is my home, I won't hide." The riders approached slowly, clearly visible now on the dusty road. Charles Blackwell sat tall in an expensive saddle, dressed for the desert heat in a light suit that nonetheless maintained its elegant lines. Beside him rode a man Hannah didn't recognize, older, with a weathered face and the unmistakable bearing of a lawman. "Sheriff Pierce," Eduardo murmured, confusion in his voice. Why would he ride with this man? As they reached the yard, Charles dismounted with practiced grace, helping the older man down from his horse. "Mrs. Quinn," he called, his voice pleasant as if they were old friends meeting by chance. "I've brought someone who needs to speak with you." The man beside him nodded respectfully, touching the brim of his hat. "Madam, I'm Sheriff Thomas Pierce from Wilcox. I was hoping we might have a word." Hannah glanced at Henry, who had positioned himself slightly in front of her, hand resting near his pistol. "What about, Sheriff?" she asked cautiously. "Perhaps we could speak privately," Pierce suggested, his gaze moving from Hannah to Henry and Eduardo with their obvious defensive postures. "Whatever you have to say can be said here," Hannah replied firmly. "These men are my family." Pierce sighed, looking uncomfortable. "Mr. Blackwell here has made some serious allegations, madam. Says you left St. Louis under questionable circumstances. Says there might be theft involved." "That's a lie," Hannah said sharply. "Charles knows very well I took nothing that wasn't mine." "She's a thief and a liar," Charles said smoothly, his handsome face arranged in an expression of sorrowful concern. "I hate to be the one to tell you this, Sheriff, but Hannah Zimmerman, or Quinn, as she calls herself now, stole valuable family heirlooms before fleeing St. Louis. Items that belonged to my mother. The only thing I took from St. Louis was myself," Hannah countered, anger rising in her chest. "And I had every right to leave after you struck me, after you threatened me." Charles's expression didn't waver. "I never laid a hand on her, Sheriff." "Those are delusions. Hannah has always had a flair for the dramatic, I'm afraid. As for the bruise she arrived with, who knows how she came by that. Perhaps her new husband can explain it." Sheriff Pierce looked increasingly uncomfortable. "Mrs. Quinn, your husband came to see me this morning, told me quite a different story. Said this man was harassing you, that he had no legitimate claim on you." "Elijah was telling the truth," Hannah insisted. "Charles and I were engaged briefly in St. Louis. I broke that engagement when I discovered he was embezzling from my father's business. He struck me when I refused to go through with the wedding. I fled to protect myself, answered Mr. Quinn's advertisement for a bride, and came here legally as his wife." "She's twisting the facts," Charles interjected smoothly. "We were to be married. Everything was arranged. Then suddenly she disappeared along with several valuable items, a diamond necklace, a ring, other pieces worth considerable sums. Her father was devastated by the betrayal." "My father?" Hannah repeated, genuinely shocked. "You've spoken with my father," Charles smiled coldly. "Of course. He's the one who asked me to find you, to bring you home to face the consequences of your actions." A chill ran through Hannah at the thought of her father and Charles in alliance against her. It made a terrible kind of sense her father would believe Charles, the business partner he trusted, over his own daughter. "Sheriff," Henry spoke up. "I'm Henry Zimmerman, Hannah's cousin. I've been tracking Mr. Blackwell for months, ever since I learned he was searching for Hannah. The man is obsessed. Whatever story he's told you about stolen jewelry is fabricated to give him an excuse to pursue her." Pierce looked between them, clearly trying to sort truth from lies. "This is becoming more complicated than I expected," he admitted. "Where is Mr. Quinn now?" "I'd like to hear from him directly." "He went to town looking for you," Hannah said. "We expected him back by now. a flicker of something triumph, crossed Charles's face so quickly Hannah almost missed it. "Perhaps he's been delayed," Charles suggested. "Wilcox can be distracting." Something about his tone sent warning signals through Hannah's mind. "What have you done?" she demanded. "Where is my husband?" "I'm sure he's fine," Charles said dismissively. "Now about those stolen items, Sheriff," Henry interrupted sharply. "I suggest we ride into town immediately to locate Mr. Quinn. I don't trust this man's innocent act." Pierce hesitated, looking uncomfortable. "Now, I don't want to jump to conclusions, then I'll go," Henry said firmly. "Eduardo will stay with Hannah." Before anyone could object, Henry was striding toward the barn to saddle a horse. Charles watched him go with narrowed eyes, then turned back to Hannah with a smile that didn't reach his eyes. "While we wait for your cousin to return with your husband," he said, emphasizing the words as if they were fabrications, "perhaps you and I could speak privately, Hannah, for old time's sake." "I have nothing to say to you," Hannah replied coldly, "and you are not welcome in my home." Charles's smile tightened. "Your home, this ranch," he gestured dismissively at the modest house, the dusty yard. "Is this really what you left me for, what you threw away your future for, to become a cowboy's wife isolated in the middle of nowhere?" "I left you because you were not the man you pretended to be," Hannah said clearly. "And yes, I would choose this life, this home, this husband 1,000 times over the life you offered." Charles stepped closer, his voice dropping so that only Hannah could hear. "He won't be your husband much longer," he whispered. "One way or another, you're coming back to St. Louis with me." Before Hannah could respond, the sound of approaching horses drew everyone's attention. 3 riders appeared on the road from town, Elijah in the lead, followed by Henry, and a man Hannah didn't recognize. Relief flooded through her at the sight of Elijah, unharmed and riding strong. Charles stepped back, his expression smoothing into polite neutrality as the riders dismounted. "Sheriff," Elijah acknowledged Pierce coolly before moving to Hannah's side, his arm coming around her protectively. "I see Blackwell got here before I could return." "Mr. Quinn," the sheriff nodded, "found your cousin on the road along with Marshal Jenkins here." The stranger tipped his hat to Hannah. "Madam, U.S. Marshal William Jenkins." Charles's confident demeanor faltered slightly at the marshal's introduction. "What's a federal marshal doing here? This is a simple matter of stolen property." "Is it?" Jenkins asked mildly. "That's not what Mr. Quinn and Mr. Zimmerman tell me. They have quite a different story, one involving fraud, embezzlement, and assault in St. Louis, followed by interstate pursuit and harassment." Charles's face hardened. "Whatever they've told you is lies. Hannah is my fiancée. She stole from me and fled. I have every right to recover my property and bring her home." "Ex-fiancée," Hannah corrected firmly, "and I stole nothing." "Mrs. Quinn has provided a compelling account," Jenkins continued as if Charles hadn't spoken. "And Mr. Zimmerman has brought documentation that supports her claims. Telegrams from St. Louis paint a very different picture of you, Mr. Blackwell." Charles's hand moved toward his jacket, and suddenly the atmosphere tensed, everyone acutely aware of the potential for violence. "This is ridiculous," he snarled. "You can't possibly believe these people over a respectable businessman." "Respectable?" Jenkins raised an eyebrow. "The banking authorities in Missouri might disagree. They've been investigating you for months, Mr. Blackwell. Embezzlement, fraud, serious charges. Your pursuit of Mrs. Quinn across state lines just adds to the list." For the first time, genuine fear flashed across Charles's handsome features. "This is absurd. I've done nothing wrong." "Then you won't mind returning to St. Louis to clear your name," Jenkins said pleasantly. "I have the authority to take you into custody and escort you back to Missouri for questioning." Charles looked wildly from the marshal to Hannah to Elijah, like a trapped animal seeking escape. "You can't do this," he insisted. "Sheriff, you know me. We've spent days together. Tell him this is a mistake." Sheriff Pierce looked deeply uncomfortable. "Actually, Mr. Blackwell, seems I don't know you at all. Marshal Jenkins showed me those telegrams from St. Louis. You've been lying to me from the start." Charles's composure finally broke. With a snarl of rage, he lunged toward Hannah, hand reaching inside his jacket. "You ruined everything," he shouted. "If I can't have you." No one. The rest of his threat was lost as Elijah moved with surprising speed for such a large man, intercepting Charles before he could reach Hannah. One powerful blow sent Charles sprawling in the dust, blood streaming from his nose. Marshal Jenkins was on him in an instant, knee in his back, handcuffs snapping around his wrists even as Charles continued to struggle and curse. "Charles Blackwell, you're under arrest for attempted assault, harassment across state lines, and suspicion of financial crimes in the state of Missouri. You have the right to remain silent, though you don't seem inclined to exercise it." As Jenkins hauled Charles to his feet, the once elegant man was transformed hair wild, blood staining his expensive suit, face contorted with rage as he spat threats and accusations at Hannah. "This isn't over," he shouted as Jenkins dragged him toward the horses. "Your father will never accept this. You'll see. You'll come crawling back when this falls apart." Hannah stood tall, Elijah's arm around her waist, watching as Charles was forced onto his horse, hands cuffed before him. "No, Charles," she said clearly. "It is over. It was over the moment you showed your true nature." As Marshal Jenkins prepared to depart with his prisoner, he paused to address Hannah and Elijah. "I'll be taking him back to St. Louis to face charges. Mrs. Quinn, you may be called to testify eventually, though we'll try to handle matters without troubling you if possible." "I'll testify if needed," Hannah said firmly. "I want him to face justice for what he's done." Jenkins nodded approvingly. "Your cousin's evidence will help. He's been collecting affidavits and statements for months, building a case against Blackwell." Hannah looked at Henry with surprise and gratitude. "You never mentioned that." Henry shrugged modestly. "Wanted to be sure before I gave you false hope. Thomas would have wanted me to be thorough." As the marshal departed with Charles securely in custody, Sheriff Pierce approached Hannah and Elijah, hat in hand. "Mrs. Quinn, I owe you an apology. I should have been more skeptical of Blackwell's claims." "You were doing your job, Sheriff," Elijah said, more gracious than Hannah felt capable of being. "No harm done." After the sheriff departed, promising to check in on them in a few days, the ranch settled into an unnatural quiet. Hannah, Elijah, Henry, and Eduardo stood in the yard, the dust from the departing riders still hanging in the air, the tension of the confrontation slowly dissipating. "It's really over?" Hannah asked quietly, hardly daring to believe it. Elijah pulled her close, pressing a kiss to her temple. "It's over. He can't hurt you anymore." That evening, after the excitement had settled and Eduardo had returned to his cabin, Hannah, Elijah, and Henry sat on the porch watching the sunset paint the Arizona sky in spectacular golds and purples. Hannah rested against Elijah's side, his arm around her shoulders, a peace settling over her that she had never known before. "What will you do now?" Elijah asked Henry, who sat cleaning his pistol methodically. Henry considered the question. "Thought I might stay in the area for a while. Arizona agrees with me, and I've got family here now." He glanced at Hannah with a smile. "If that's all right with you both." "More than all right," Hannah assured him warmly. "I'm just beginning to know my cousin. I'm not ready to say goodbye yet." "Besides," Elijah added, "we could use the help around here. Ranch this size needs more than 2 men to run it properly." Henry looked surprised, then pleased at the implicit job offer. I'd be honored. Always wanted to try my hand at ranching. A comfortable silence fell between them, broken only by the distant lowing of cattle and the soft whisper of the evening breeze through the cottonwoods. I think it's time we shared our news, Hannah said softly to Elijah. At his questioning look, she nodded encouragingly. Elijah cleared his throat, sitting up straighter. Henry, we're going to have a baby. Hannah's expecting. Henry's face broke into a genuine smile. Congratulations, that's wonderful news. We'd like you to be part of our child's life, Hannah continued, to be Uncle Henry. To share the stories of our family, the history I never knew. Emotion flickered across Henry's usually composed features. I'd be honored, he said simply. As darkness settled over the ranch, Hannah felt a contentment so complete it brought tears to her eyes. From the frightened woman who had stepped off the stagecoach with a bruised face and a desperate heart, she had transformed into someone new, a beloved wife, an expectant mother, a woman with family both born and chosen surrounding her. Later that night, as she and Elijah lay together in the darkness of their bedroom, Hannah placed his hand on her stomach. I was so afraid, she whispered, that he would take this all away from me, from us. Never, Elijah murmured against her hair. From the moment you stepped off that stagecoach, you were meant to be here, with me. Even with my bruised eye and my secrets, Hannah asked with a soft laugh. Especially then, Elijah said seriously. That's when I knew you were someone worth knowing, worth protecting, worth loving. A woman with the courage to leave everything behind and start over deserved a man who would cherish her for it, not punish her. Hannah turned in his arms to face him, tracing the beloved features with her fingertips. When did you know that you loved me? Elijah considered the question thoughtfully. There wasn't one moment, it was 100 little moments. The way you made curtains from flour sacks, how you hummed while you worked. The first time you stood up to Mrs. Hartford in town, your kindness to Eduardo and Miguel. He smiled in the darkness. But if I had to choose one moment, it might be that first day in Wilcox, when Daniels insulted you and you looked more worried about me than yourself after I knocked him down. I thought you'd get in trouble, Hannah remembered. I wasn't used to someone defending me. And I wasn't used to someone caring whether I got in trouble, Elijah replied. What about you? When did you know you loved me? Hannah didn't have to think long. The night you gave me your mother's hair comb, not because of the gift itself, though it was beautiful, but because I saw what it cost you to share that piece of your past with me, how much you were trusting me with. Elijah's arms tightened around her. I've never regretted it, not for a moment. As they drifted toward sleep, Hannah felt the last lingering fears from Charles's appearance melt away. Whatever the future held, the birth of their child, the growing of their ranch, the building of their family, she would face it with Elijah beside her, with Henry nearby, with the strength she had discovered within herself. The woman who had arrived in Wilcox with a black eye and a desperate heart had found not just safety, but love. Not just escape, but home. Spring 1879 brought the birth of Matthew Thomas Quinn, a strong, healthy boy with his father's blue eyes and his mother's dark hair. Henry, true to his word, had stayed on at the ranch, proving himself an invaluable addition to their growing operation. Under Elijah's guidance, he had taken to ranching with surprising aptitude, and the Quinn Ranch was thriving with the additional help. Charles Blackwell had been convicted of financial fraud in St. Louis and sentenced to 5 years in prison. Hannah had not needed to testify after all, as the evidence against him had been overwhelming once investigators began looking closely at his business dealings. Her father, shamed by his association with Blackwell, had written a stiff letter acknowledging her marriage and the birth of his grandson, though he made no mention of visiting. Hannah had replied with a cordial but distant letter of her own, enclosing a photograph of Matthew, but making it clear that her life was in Arizona now, with the family she had chosen. On Matthew's first birthday, as friends and neighbors gathered to celebrate at the Quinn Ranch, now expanded with a new wing and a proper garden, Hannah stood on the porch watching Elijah show their son to Eduardo's newest foal. The baby's delighted laughter carried across the yard, bringing a smile to her face. "He's going to be a horseman like his father," Henry observed, joining her with a glass of lemonade. "Already fearless." "Just like his father," Hannah agreed fondly. Henry studied her face. "You're happy here?" It wasn't a question, but Hannah answered anyway. "Happier than I ever dreamed possible. Every morning I wake up grateful for the courage to leave, to start over, to find this. And to think it all began with a black eye and a suspicious cowboy," Henry mused with a smile. Hannah watched as Elijah, noticing her on the porch, lifted Matthew in his arms and pointed toward her. "Look, Matthew," she heard him say. "There's your mama, the bravest woman I know." The baby waved excitedly, and Hannah waved back, her heart full to bursting. From mail order bride to beloved wife, from frightened runaway to confident mother, her journey had been unexpected but perfect in its way. As Elijah carried their son toward her, his face alight with the love that had grown between them over the past year and a half, Hannah knew with absolute certainty that she was exactly where she was meant to be. The bruises of her past had faded completely, replaced by the warm embrace of the future she had fought so hard to claim.